So good to have you here.
Thank you.
And you are going to be talking about competitive analysis, right?
Yeah, so I'm going to, and you'll have to remind me how I share my my deck here. You got it.
There you go. All right,
Great.
I'm gonna butt out, and then the stage is yours.
Yeah, great. Okay, well, thank you for inviting me to this talk. I'm really excited to do this. Competitive intelligence is something that I'm very passionate about, but I'm bringing a different perspective. But first, let me actually introduce who I am and what I do so that you understand why I'm talking about this particular aspect of competitive intelligence. So my name is Alison Murdock. I have been a marketing leader in Silicon Valley and in Europe for many, many years, and starting with before the smartphone was invented. So yeah, I'm old. But I recently started a company called Trusted CMO. We serve early stage companies, so funded startups, and frequently we're the first marketers in. And the reason why, as you know, is most founders are not marketers. So we build a marketing capability and then help them hire and get to the next level. So what I want to talk about today is a little bit about why companies avoid competitive analysis and competitive intelligence. It's maybe if we can switch to the next slide, or if I know, I can do that. Never mind. I'm going to talk a little bit about, just the psychology around it. And I don't want to repeat what my preceding speaker said, but I love their product. I think it's an amazing investment if you can afford it. But a lot of the companies I work with are not quite there yet. So first of all, why do founders sort of avoid competitive intelligence? Well, first of all, when they come up with an idea, it's so easy. And I'm a founder too, and I've founded companies, and many of you might have as well. As you fall in love with your product, you get really excited about it, and you've thought of a different solution, and you think, no one else is doing this. I got to do this. I got to build this product. And so part of that is communicating why your product exists. What is the problem you're trying to solve? Why hasn't it been solved before? Why is no one else actually doing it? And it becomes really difficult to do that when you don't know what the alternatives are. And sometimes the alternatives are things like do nothing. I'm working with a startup today. That is the alternative. It's do nothing. There really isn't a strong competitor for them, but we'll come back to that in a second. Now, the thing is that, there is a level of competitive analysis that gets done early on in a startup's life cycle. If they're going to raise funding, they absolutely need to do it. You've heard this before, and I'm not even going to dwell on it, but I mean, you're just an ignorant fool, according to VCs, if you don't know who your set is. And it also may not be a direct competitor. It could be Google or Microsoft, who can eat your lunch in 6 months. So, it's really important that at that stage they've done it. But once they've done it, they stop. And why? They stop because they're building a team. If their team thinks someone else is going to build this product, it feels a little demotivating, So instead, they'd rather forge, headlong into a build mode. And they sort of, and I've heard this, I literally work with like tens of hundreds of startups at this point. They go, oh no one else is doing this. No, not the way we're doing this. All right. So the reason why that happens is I kind of call it falling in love and falling out of love. You could say my baby is ugly, my baby is not ugly. It's when you build a team, and as a founder, it is like being the ultimate cheerleader for your product, and so we avoid it because it just doesn't make us feel good. It makes us feel like whatever we're building, someone else is already doing it. So when you get into market, what happens is sales starts to point out weaknesses. Oh, we'd sell more if we had this feature. Or customers say, yeah, I like what you're saying, but could you just solve this problem? Or product and engineering say, you know what, we can't take on any more customers, we can't build anymore. So competitive intelligence is, I would almost say, a bit of a moderator in this position. The preceding speaker brought up a great point, which is, there's information that helps kind of bring your team together for a go-to-market strategy. So it can come in very handy to help you set your strategy. And it doesn't really have to be a chore. It doesn't have to be a negative thing. So from the perspective of someone who may not have the budget to invest in a competitive intelligence tool, there are other ways you can do this. And I'll go into that a little bit. So first of all, what I've experienced in this, I took on competitive intelligence in my previous company. And I mean, I'm not going to, I don't think I've ever been in a company that ever had a competitive intelligence practice in any meaningful way because of the reasons I just stated. So my proposal, and when I come into the clients I work with, I do this thing. We're going to have a framework. What are our goals, right? How are we going to make competitive intelligence easy if we're building it from scratch and we're not using a product? First thing is, what is the framework? And I go actually pretty deep on the framework. It's not just products and features, but it's, like everything that Compite is doing. It's press releases, is what the homepage says. It's news, it's chats with channel partners. It's a lot of different things, but, put that into a map of some kind, and then assign one person or a couple of people to be those sort of sleuths in the market. They own it, right? And they're the ones that update and review it. And also it's super important, and I think this was a point that I have seen a lot, which is, what should you be paying attention to? Because there is a lot of information that comes with a competitive intelligence or a competitive analysis. It can be, we think they're going to come out with something, or they've just, hired this guy that was at our company. I mean, there's so many things, and it can change month to month, but it's super important to just summarize the key points. And going back to why you have a framework is, why is this information important to us? There's also one thing too, that, it's not just your direct competitors. For example, if you have a product that maybe you have many competitors, but you're serving one industry very well, you still need to look at those competitors that are serving other industries, because in 3 months they could be in yours. And I've seen this happen recently. The other thing is alternatives, like the do nothing. What are customers saying? Why aren't they buying? So it's really important to be a critical thinker as you're developing this process. And then there's this sort of tactical stuff. Here is just like a very short list of the things that I would include in my homegrown, hand-built framework. And again, distilling the insights for your team is critical. One thing that often happens inside startups specifically, and remember, we're coming to the table with a bit of a bias, saying my baby is beautiful, please don't tell me they're ugly, or else I won't be able to live with myself. So remember that. It's credibility. Like, is the data you're bringing to me actually right? Is it accurate? Is it useful? Is it going to change our strategy at all? Where did you get this information? So one thing that I love about the tools that are in the market today is you're looking at a variety of quantitative tools. For example, maybe it's site traffic, like a similar web can give you some data about keywords that are converting, and that's just one of a few points. But you also will get qualitative data from customers, from partners, from venture capitalists, from all of the people that are in the market, most importantly, your customers. So what you can do is take all of that and have your SWAT team synthesize it and point out, what are some of the concerns that you might want to grapple with in the next, couple of months that might change your roadmap or a go-to-market initiative. So one example of that might be, you have a competitor who seems to be doing a much better job of moving customers through their pipeline. So they're getting free trials, they're activating, their sales cycle is 3 months and yours is 6 months. So that's a really good point to investigate. What can you do to accelerate the sales process? In enterprise sales, I work in B2B, and then most of it is at some level of enterprise. To take a page from the free trial or free sign up book and just and offer some kind of value-added service that is only available if they take a sales call without being creepy, but make it fun, make it interesting. But these are the kinds of little pieces of intel that you need to pay attention to that may help your eventual outcome. And then, of course, there's, all the tactical stuff that goes along with this, applying the knowledge that you've collected to drive outcomes. So, in the world that I'm in, sales enablement, it's a big thing. Battle cards, how do we talk about our product? How do we compare it? How do we have a slide deck that's like 75 slides long, and then you've got that one slide that's you versus them? You don't want to be a jerk about it. One of my friends, Latney Conant at Sixth Sense says, they're actually very emphatic about being nice about competitors. You don't want to be a jerk, but you do need to know the information, because a lot of times your customers know more than you do. So you have to be informed. So having those materials ready for your sales team is very important. The other thing is, in B2B specifically, there are what I would call shadow buyers or background buyers. Buying committees are 5 to 7 people. We all know these stats, but there's always somebody that you're not directly talking to, that your salesperson doesn't want to deal with. Maybe it's IT. Have those materials ready that are proactively addressing some of the competitive concerns. Now, it isn't necessarily like they do it better than us or that we do it better than them. It's really, what are the objections that that person would have routinely, whether they're talking to you or another vendor? Get in front of that. And that, looking at G2 Crowd, such a great resource, or any of the other resources like that. Why do customers like that product? Why do they not like it? What are the things that make it really difficult to be a customer? So these are all little pieces of intelligence you can use in your sales cycle to smooth out the process for your sales team. And then, finally, kind of rethinking, your launch process. What are you going to put on the roadmap? Prioritizing. I'm not a big fan of changing the roadmap per se, but sometimes you just need to come out with that feature. And I've been in those situations, and it's like, this is a no-brainer. Just do it. And then how do you talk about it when you're late to the market? Something else. And then finally, triangulating all the key points and rethinking, how is your messaging changing? What's on your homepage? That's always one of the first things I do in competitive analysis. I screenshot the hell out of that, because that is what they want people to know. I look at press releases. How are you talking about your product? How are you exploiting the gaps that you found between you and your competitors? And that is really it. I just put out a load of information. Happy to take questions as needed. If there are any questions.
Hello, thank you very much.
Sure.
So here's a question. You say you're taking screenshots of home pages and so on. However, when we zoom into any random product category, email marketing, doesn't matter, and we look at the top 10 or 20 even companies, and what are they saying about themselves? And they're saying the exact same thing.
Oh, God.
Massive sameness.
Yes. I just want to die inside every time I see that. And that is exactly why I do that, because I'm like, we are a data-driven, who freaking cares, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That's just not, that's why I love, startups there's a lot of fear in being a startup, and why, you run out of money, you fail, whatever, but it's okay to be different. And so if you screenshot 10 of your competitors and you're like, they're all saying this, what's your choice? I'd say the opposite. I'd say something much more inflammatory or better or bigger, or change my design. We're such visual people now too. It's more than words. It's also the experience of your website. So it's a great opportunity to break out from the norm. And a lot of times customers will complain, well, oh, you're saying this, they said this too. That's what I was talking about earlier, is find the right words to say, not to take them down per se, but how do you express, what it is that your product does? Is it that the user better? Is it that, it's faster to onboard. What are the key pieces that you can really emphasize in your messaging? And, frankly, homepages change a lot, and that's why monthly assessment of those is pretty important.
Mm-hmm. Is there a tool that you recommend to use for that, to automate that?
I would love to say that I do. I'm speaking a bit from the perspective of the young companies, so it's just simply control whatever Command Shift 4. but actually I do use SimilarWeb, and that's mainly for marketing purposes, looking at traffic and keywords and so forth. But unfortunately, we use a lot of elbow grease when we're in the startup world.
Well, visual ping is what you could do. That pings every time they change something on the website.
Yes,
so
that's correct.
Tool.
Yes, there is a tool actually, and I can't. Yeah, is that what it's called?
Visual ping is one of them.
That's right. I've used that before, and that is actually quite useful.
Mm-hmm. With SimilarWeb, though, like my personal experience is that its traffic estimations are wildly inaccurate. Like maybe it works for really big websites. Like when I look at my own stuff, like I know how much traffic I have. It's like 5 day, like they overestimate or underestimate sometimes 5x.
Yeah.
I don't know, what's your experience?
So my experience in this particular case, what I was doing was I was looking at a company that was very well established in their native country. They're from Europe, and they were coming to market in the US, which is a lot of the business I work on. And there were 5 competitors that they thought were their direct competitors, but in the US it was quite different. And so we were able to surface some entirely different, I would say, undervalued competitors for them, just based on sort of the raw traffic numbers and the keywords. And it really did play out. These were the ones that were coming up in the sales call. So for things like that, where it's simply, what is, where is their traffic coming from? Is it more US, or is it more from, Spain or France or Germany or whatever? So, you can use it for things like that to fill in some gaps. It's definitely not the only tool, but one of them.
You mentioned the sales cycle length. So competitors, 3 months or 6 months. How would you get that information?
In terms of your competitors?
Yeah, like how do you know that stuff? Like, unless you have like a spy on the inside.
Yeah. So, when I was talking a bit about, there's some qualitative data you can get and there's quantitative, that's a qualitative data, right? So a lot of us talk to, we know, because the market's small, we know investors who know these companies, we know customers that passed on that company. We also know people who used to work there. So I wouldn't say it's exactly a spy on the inside, but listening to the market and who's in market is actually something we would do.
Okay, yeah. And so how much time are you spending on all this stuff?
So I don't really advocate, because it's a great point. When you're a small company, you don't have extra time to be spending 3 weeks on competitive intelligence, and that's why these tools, there's a few Clue and Compite and others, Cran's great, where they're really useful. You want to automate that, but really it's a monthly process. So I would spend a day, or like a few hours, just maintaining the frameworks I had, and then double checking, what were the points that I was going to bring to the product team. I think the worst offenders often are the product team in terms of lack of competitive insights. They just don't want to know. They really, they don't, and they protect the engineers from knowing often. So we had to be very careful about the information we were bringing to them, that it was credible, that there were multiple data points. So when you're talking about something like hearing X competitor sales cycles longer than yours, they're going to be like, oh, that's bullshit, So you need to be able to validate that with, either some level of, other like outside confirmation, or simply that that they're so similar to you that if your cycle is 9 months, theirs is probably around that. One of the pieces of intelligence that I've seen too, when I mentioned that sometimes in your go-to-market, you can activate a certain initiative, like suddenly having a free trial or something, when you see that on your competitor site, you're like, oh, they're having a problem, right? They're trying to adjust the same way we are to try to activate this buyer to take action sooner than they are.
Mm-hmm. Well, what do you say to the argument that over time competitors are becoming more similar because of this constant benchmarking and checking on what the neighbor is doing, and then if three, let's say, startups would start in the same space, but they couldn't see what the other ones are doing, we would end up with wildly different products. And so basically doing competitive intelligence leads to sameness. Well, what's your take on this?
Yeah, I mean, it is a risk. I've actually experienced that where, my previous role, we had many competitors, and got very confusing for the customer, because they were like, I can't really tell the difference between this one, and this one. And so, how we had to differentiate was actually more around customer experience. So in our world, and it was internal communications, we took a very different tact around how we treated our customers. Our way of going to market, our way of nurturing them, our way of land and expand, it still stands out as being quite different. And part of it was the strategy that we developed to uplift a buying role that was actually largely ignored. An internal communicator, it's like, okay, they speechwriter, like, what do they do? And now, of course, in the pandemic, we're all like, wow, we need to know if our company's even open tomorrow. Like that, it is important. But back then, it wasn't as much, right? So this was a role that had, low resources, but of actually quite high risk. They had to get the CEO on video, or they had to interpret, bad news or crisis communication. So, really, figuring out how you can differentiate and create a narrative around your company. Again, competitive intelligence can lead to sameness, but I think what you're really trying to do is know enough to say, where can we break out?
Gotcha. Yeah. Let me quickly check here if we have also audience questions. And how do you do competitive analysis for similar audience but not similar product?
That is a great question. I guess the first question I asked is sort of why, but it sounds like what we're looking at here is persona research. So, for example, if you could make the assumption that, I'm going to go back to internal communications because that's a use case I know very well. Those buyers buy a platform to help them communicate, but they also might buy online video creation tool. So doing research around what else they buy. I don't know if time is at a minimum, I'm not sure I completely grok why one would want to look at all their competitors, unless there's something that you are planning to add to your product or an integration you're planning to provide that would lead to you assessing what else your customers would buy and how they would use it. So in that case, it might be somewhat similar in terms of the process, but again, depends on what the outcome is.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Alison. It was a pleasure to have you here.
Yeah, great to speak. Thank you.